today for the Trust and Talk conversation. This is an important topic that her and I are quite passionate about. We're going to be discussing a few things. We're going to be talking about transparent communication and community building, navigating stress, trauma, and human connection, as well as strategies that you can take away for fostering trust and safety through intentional communication. But before we begin, we would love for you to drop in the comments where you are tuning in from. And if you can hear us, give us a thumbs up. I'm also going to be checking your comments from my phone. So if I'm looking down, it's because I'm paying attention to you guys as well. All right, I see Jen and Susanna. So welcome, everybody. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We are going to introduce ourselves. So I am Famia. I am based out in Detroit. And who am I? I'm a traveler, book reader, adventurist, and baker. But when I'm not doing that, I am a community manager and social impact advisor. I've been an educator for over 15 years. And also, I'm sitting on the intersection of health and wellness, education, and technology. And I'm currently working alongside Katie and the team at Integrate Trauma Informed Network. And with that said, I want to hand it on over to Katie to introduce herself and get us started. And also, please feel free to go ahead and drop your comments and your thoughts in the chat section as well. Over
Hi,
to you,
everyone.
Katie.
Yeah, thanks, Famia. I'm so glad to be here with you. Always in conversation with you. It's always a delight. I'm Katie Kurtz. I, she, her pronouns. I'm joining you from the unceded lands of the Erie people, which is Cleveland, Ohio. It's so cold here, right on the Great Lake of Lake Erie. And I am a licensed social worker, a certified coach, and a subject matter expert in integrative trauma informed care. I have a great deal of passion for trauma informed care, and I get the great privilege of leading trainings and advising and consulting on this with at the intersection of almost every industry. My passion really lies in making this approach integrative and inclusive for all people. I'm also a newlywed and a dog mom to two puppies, and really excited. My first LinkedIn Live. So really excited to join the party here and to talk about one of my favorite topics.
Yeah. I love that, Katie, and welcome. When I found out that Katie was doing her first live here with me, I mean, I couldn't be more happier. And Katie, I mean, you would be like the perfect guest for the topics that we're discussing because I know trauma informed communication and the approaches are, your area of expertise, among many other things, of course.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm so thrilled and always incredibly grateful to be a part of the Integrate Network. It's so important for our capacity and our sustainability in this work to be amongst really good humans all over the United States, but also all over the world. So this is really fun.
Yeah. So, Katie, we talk about community and the spaces that it's built in. We talk about it being built in professional spaces, but also collectively. Do you want to go ahead and talk about a little bit about that?
Yeah. So we can't really compartmentalize our humanity. We try, and sometimes we have to, depending on the intersection of identities we hold, in order to feel safe. But community is universal to everything we do, both professionally and personally. And so it's always interesting for me to see how we look at leadership, quote unquote, leadership skills with communication and relationship building and community building be at the forefront of that within our professional worlds. But we also know that intersects everything in our personal lives as well. And so these skills aren't just leadership skills or professional skills, they're life skills, and they grow and they build and help nurture those different facets of who we are. And we know communication skills are essential to relationship building. And in order to have really healthy and nurturing relationships, no matter who they're with, trust is necessary. And trust cannot be assumed. It has to be built over time. And when we're able to feel a sense of trust with another person or a group of people, we're then able to access a felt sense of safety in our brains, which tells our body, and then we're able to have that response and that feeling. And so it's such a key component. It's not just at the surface, it's much deeper.
Absolutely. And Katie, as you were talking about, the approach and how that applies in our personal and professional spaces, when I'm building community, communication's at the very top of my list because in order for me to build relationships with the members in my space, I have to build trust. Trust is like the basic or the building block. It's the foundation that needs to be set first in order for you to come in to my space, and then from that I can build the relationship. But the other thing I have to remind folks of when they come into community spaces and build relationships, it's not built overnight. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes intention, and it takes, the ability to really know how to effectively communicate with the people that come in. And it's a long term investment that we have to give. It's a give and take on both ends, is how I see it.
Absolutely. And we have to remember that there's more than just this surface level conversation at play to build trust. We build trust at the pace of our nervous systems, and there are things happening within our bodies and our brain. Our brain is in our bodies for trust to be felt and built. And we have to remember that trust is not a universal one size fits all type of thing. What may for me feel like trust and how I build trust is going to be different than you based on a variety of things. My the intersection of identities I hold, the social context and systems I live within, and my lived experiences. And if I have lived experiences of trauma or stress or adverse community environments or intentionally or historically being marginalized, my ability and the pace of my ability to trust may be a little slower and may take a little more time than somebody else who may have a different set of advantages or privileges than I do. So we need to remember that trust is built at the pace of our nervous systems, and that
Mm,
takes time. And we know our nervous system loves four things: pace,
mhm,
predictability, consistency, and repetition. And when we think about trust, those are really key components of building trust, right? If we think about a brand that we are loyal to, we know, like, even if we don't love the company or whatever, we know, like, I buy this certain phone or a laptop. I won't say the name of who I'm maybe I'm referring to, but I know the reason why I purchase the same brand over and over again because it's reliable, it's predictable, I know what to expect, the customer
mhm,
service, the outcome, whatever. There's some level of consistency there that allows me to build trust with that brand. The same goes with a variety of other things, whether it's in within community, within our workplace, within relationships of any kind. We need to be able to feel some predictability, some consistency, and have that pace and that time so it doesn't feel like too much, too fast, too soon. So we can then
mhm.
feel a felt sense of safety, not just physical safety, but psychological safety, social safety, moral safety, cultural safety.
You said so many good things, Katie. I'm gonna have to backtrack and come right back to a few of them. So when you talked about pace, the thing that we have to be very mindful of is that we don't trust the same way the person next to you or beside you does. We have different levels of trust. Some of us are extroverts, some of us are introverts. So it might take some of us longer than others to build that trust. So, what would you say to someone who wants to build trust but doesn't know how to? What can they
Hmm.
do?
Yeah. So I think I always like to encourage people to opt for curiosity over judgment.
Mm,
It's really easy for us to get very judgmental of ourselves or have different parts of ourselves get flared up. Whether that be, our inner critic, judgment, shame, all of those really fun things. But if
mhm,
trust is hard for you to build, if you're somebody that has a hard time trusting, my guess is, and I don't love to assume, but I'm going to venture a
mhm,
guess that you have some sort of lived experience in your lifetime, whether it's childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, whatever moment in your life where there was some sort of rupture in relationship. where you had something where a rupture being some sort of break, it could be a small break, a tear, or a very clean break where trust was broken. And that lived experience has an imprint on you and your body. I always say the issues are in our tissues. We don't lose
Hmm.
that remembrance. And so what happens is that if we had trust ruptured or broken or harmed, that can impact future relationships because you may go into a relationship and you might be intellectually thinking, oh, new relationship, this is fine, I'm going to build trust, but your body remembers. And
Hmm.
you may then start to feel like notice certain things, certain cues from that other person that may trigger, and I use that word lightly here,
Hmm.
that felt sense of pause, of oh no, there's something here externally that is not making me feel safe. Therefore, I may not be able to trust. So it's really important we look at kind of a little bit of why trust can be so hard. And especially if we look at the spectrum of things, it might be smaller ruptures or breaks, or we may have had really significant trust issues where our autonomy or our choice or our control was taken away from us through some sort of event, a relationship or environment, abuse of some kind, where trust may be very hard to handle. So if that's the case, it's honoring that reality and first just allowing yourself to have a little compassion that it's okay if trust is hard for you. That's okay. There's nothing wrong. There's no binary here of good, bad, right, or wrong. It's because your body is brilliant. Your body is trying to keep you safe and it's telling you, "Oh no, we can't trust here." And so it's coming back to a way of slowly building micro practices of learning to build trust so that you can rebuild that felt sense of safety and doing that with people who are also willing to meet you where you're at.
Absolutely. And also, about honoring, like we've talked about before in previous conversations, honoring people's lived experiences. It's acknowledging where they are and not assuming or putting a label or putting judgments or assumptions. When people come into places, they want to feel a sense of safety, right? You need to also make sure that you're creating that space. And, when I'm building community spaces, that's something I have to keep in mind. Am I building a space that's just for me? Or is this for everybody collectively? And then it's up to me to really build that safe space so that it's inclusive, so that when you come in, Katie, or anyone else, feel like, okay, Famia really does have my best interest at heart. And that also brings in the trust, the transparency, and letting you all know up front, this is what to expect through the guidelines. This is how you can participate, but giving people a choice in that transparency of this is how you can show up, this is how you can collaborate, and this is how you can contribute. But I always want it to be to where they're most comfortable choosing that as well and not putting
Yeah.
the pressure on them.
Absolutely. So you highlighted two really important things, well, three really important things that help us promote trust in spaces that we exist in. The first one being is we need to pause and remember and ask ourselves again with curiosity over judgment, am I coming into this space assuming everyone has is feeling safe and that assuming everyone's going to be able to trust everyone all the time? I can tell you right away that if I'm starting a new job or going into a new community space, I there's trust isn't there. How could it be? I don't know anyone. I don't know what to
Hmm.
expect. How could I possibly trust people there? And I want to honor the nuance here that in some places we have to have kind of a blind trust. Like if you're going to the emergency room and you're having some sort
Hmm.
of, health problem, you have to kind of blindly trust the people there are going to take care of you or fix you up or whatever it may be. But we're talking more community ways. So I encourage people to notice, like, where am I assuming here that people are automatically going to feel safe with me or feel trust in me? And if you notice yourself assuming that, can you pause and reframe it a bit and then tap into the two things you mentioned, which are choice? We build
Hmm.
trust through offering autonomous choice and allowing people and remembering that we can trust they know what's best for them. when you come into my space, whether it's a training or community, I trust that you know yourself best. And that when I offer options or space agreements or expectations, you're going to be able to choose what's best for you, and which then is able to make you feel like you can show up as yourself in our space to converse, to build relationships, etc. And that's what we call consent. I'm allowing you to choose. You're choosing what's best for you, which is consent and choice, which are two hallmark core elements of trauma informed care. And when we're able to have that autonomy and agency and self determination, we're more likely to be able to build trust, because we're looking at more of that expansive space for that ability to happen rather than assuming it, which makes things feel really constricted and tight. And there's little room for choice to occur.
Absolutely. You just said so many amazing things that I want to come back to, but I want to jump in and just acknowledge our friends that came in. And if I pronounce the names wrong, please, I apologize in advance. But we have Delphine or Delphine. If I said it wrong, I'm so sorry. Welcome. Neela, so happy to see you. Josh and Christine, so glad that you made it. And Christine had a comment. She said, I think many people make the assumption you are where they are, and that couldn't be further from the truth, and assuming nothing and leading with kindness goes a long way. That was a really great comment.
Yeah, absolutely. Pausing to not assume, but rather listen, to understand and show up, and take that time, taking that time, not rushing, but rather pacing yourself at the pace of trust to be built.
Yeah. And I want to add to what you said, Katie, and to what Christine said. When we assume that we think we know what people are, and that the phrase that I hear a lot, and I used to say it, and I'm very guilty of it, and I stopped, is when people say, I've been in your shoes. And I had to sit on that. And I'm just like, wait a second. When I say that I've been in your shoes, that means I've been in your experiences, the very moment that you've been in, the thoughts, the ideas, everything that you've been through. I was there at that very exact time. So then I've had to pull back and actually pause and think about, what does that mean? It's almost like I'm kind of like undermining, but I really am not. I'm being intentional with what I'm saying. But it's almost like I'm taking away that lived experience. I'm not really honoring the way I'm supposed to. So I have to kind of be very mindful of that when I'm taking that pause, because when we do that, when we practice the pause, we're in the very present moment of with that very person. So that's something I'm also practicing as well. Otherwise, everything gets lost in translation. There's miscommunication happening, there's misunderstandings. And then again, that goes back to what Christine said. When people are making these assumptions about you, there's just a lot of things that are happening. And it's kind of like more work to kind of go back and really just fix, or not fix, but adjust or self correct. That's probably the
Yeah.
most appropriate word to say.
This is one of the most common things that happens because we live in a culture where we're not taught to feel our feelings. So we don't always have the same emotional capacity as one another. And we might have the best intentions in the world. I know how you feel. Oh, I've been there. I've been in your shoes. I know exactly what you're going through. These statements have really good intentions, but that impact, what happens is that can make someone feel on the receiving end like, oh, do you though? Or unseen, unheard? Like, how would you even know? Or whatever. And so that impact may not align. And what happens is we may create an unintentional pathway for harm or hurt to occur. And so, really, when we look at building relationships, building trust, one of the simplest things we can do is to look at our language. We,
Mm.
again, if our intentions to say, I understand, I empathize, I've had similar experiences, let's shift our language out of these positive platitudes that can make people feel unseen and unheard, which can shut down the ability to trust, and rather shift our language to say, oh, gosh, thank you so much for sharing that with me. I haven't gone through the same thing, but something similar, so I can relate. Or that really resonates with me. Thank you. Thanking people, letting them know you heard them rather than thinking about what you're going to say. Um,
Mm.
let's toss those positive platitudes. I know we want to be kind and those are nice and polite things, but they often make people feel really unseen and unheard. And it makes people feel just really awful. Let's try to shift our language to allow people to feel validated and affirmed. And if you do not know what to say, by all means say that. I would rather someone say, "Oh, I have no idea what to say right now.
Hmm.
I just want to say thanks for sharing that," or like I'm with you, or I'm cheering you on, whatever it is. I'm more apt to build trust with somebody who admits and is transparent in saying, "I do not know what to say right now," rather than showering me with positive platitudes or toxic positivity or things that people think they have to perform to say rather than just being honest.
Yeah, and this reminds me, Katie, and for those that are here listening, when I started working in the health and wellness space, and I was in a space of mental health providers, I didn't know the lingo, the language, the terminology. I mean, I did so much research, but at the same time, I had to remind myself, practice the pause, that I don't know everything yet. And the way I'm going to figure that out is by asking, not assuming. And if there was something that I wasn't clear on, is to ask the clarifying questions. And I had to check in for understanding with myself, is what I'm relaying, is what I'm saying the message I want to send across? And if I don't know what the word is, I need to ask. So I'm always keeping in mind simple, clear, and direct is the best way to go, and not using those fancy words, the jargon, when you go to the doctor's office and they're just throwing out these words and you're like, I have no idea. And there's just a lot of confusion that starts happening when you're using language and you're not sensitive, to the different backgrounds that come through in your spaces, personally or professionally.
Absolutely. And honestly, it's all about capacity building. And that's what trauma informed care is capacity building. How do we build our capacity to be with and witness other people? And be able, if you're uncomfortable or you don't know what to do when other people experience feelings or share their lived experiences, that again is an invitation to get curious with yourself. What about what they shared or said feels uncomfortable for you? Where can you explore ways to build your capacity to bear witness to that other person? No one's asking you to fix, judge, or solve. They're just asking you to listen and hold space for them in the moment. And so, finding ways for yourself to get curious, to learn how to explore your emotional capacity is only going to deepen your ability to show up and build relationships and trust with other people.
Yeah. And it also reminds me, Katie, too, is not to assume that what we're saying is going to be received the way we want it to, and the way people are going to respond is not the way we're going to expect them to either. Again, people come from different backgrounds, spaces, and like you said, capacity. So it's always important, at least what I do too, and I'm sure you do, Katie, is that I ask questions. Is there anything else that you want to add to this, or just the checkpoints, the touch points, the checking for understanding? I did this a lot as an ESL instructor, English as a second language, and 99% of my learners came from different countries. Their language was different, their experiences were different. So I had to really, in a sense, modify the language that I was using and throw out that fancy teacher talk and really just get at their level, meet them where they were, and use a language that made sense to them. And if I didn't know, I asked. I had to ask. That was the only way we could figure out a common ground between us, was to ask and admit that, hey, I don't know exactly what you've gone through or what you're, the wording, but let's try to figure it out together. So there was that understanding that happened between us. And it really did strengthen our bonds and our relationships. I mean, our connections really deepened and they felt much more safer,
Of
and warm to come to
course.
the environment.
Of course, exactly, because you did not assume, you asked. You opened up and created an invitation to get to better know that person. You showed that individual or those individuals that you're somebody who's leading with curiosity and openness and inclusion. You're not thinking everyone's a monolith and like Julie's, here in the comments said like lots of people experience this, like just bunching people's experiences together and then assuming everyone's the same. Instead, you you made sure to ask those questions, gain clarity, invite into conversation. And that's a way, like, and you just said the evidence of that is a stronger connection, a stronger bond, maybe more opportunity for deepened understanding and connection. That is the result. That is the return on investment, those buzzwords we love here on LinkedIn, of these types of human-centered communications and trauma-informed care.
Yeah, and going to what you were saying, and then the language that we use, Katie, about the transparency of like self-correcting. If we don't know what the word is or the meaning, we ask, we check for understanding. And there, I'm telling you, when I worked with children, they really humbled me and taught me so much that I carry all of those skills with me because they're very direct. And what I love about kids, they're just going to say it as it is. And there was a point where I assumed they knew what I was doing. And because I was using these fancy words that I expected them to know, and I would say, do you guys understand? Do you have any questions? They would get the nod. But when it came for like an exam or a test, they failed that question. And when I had asked what went wrong, and they said, Miss, I didn't understand. I'm like, well, why did you ask? And they're just like, we were too scared. We were embarrassed to raise our hand and, say the fact that they were, not getting the question. But that goes to the fact of building these very safe environments and building trust and not being labeled or judged and so forth.
Absolutely. Yeah, any conversation is always going to be the gate that when we open up conversation through questions, through curiosity, will be the gate that opens to allow for trust to be built. If we shut that gate and don't, and just assume, or we shut down communication, or we think we know what's best for other people, we center them in our experiences rather than their own, then we're shutting and locking that gate for trust to be built. And we have to remember that some people will be forthright in saying, I don't feel comfortable or safe in the space. But we have to remember, again, depending on the lived experiences and intersections of identities people hold, they may not feel safe to ever express that. So we may start to see behaviors or expressions of people shutting down, of just trying to get through. And sometimes people have to do that for survival. And so we want to be sure that gate is open for trust, again, not to swoosh in and take over, because
Mm-hmm.
when trust is built that quickly, it can be a yellow flag sometimes for caution. We want it to be built, again, at the pace of our nervous systems.
Yeah, and that's why it's really important, Katie, too, based on what you said, is to have to have the transparency up front and center, as letting people know that this is what's expected. These are the guidelines, but also there's a choice in how you collaborate and how you show up, and the way in giving them that choice to do so. Because when I've been in spaces before, there was no leeway, there was no room for me to be creative or grow or to show up as myself. I felt like I was just coming in with parts of me, but not full parts, or like my whole self. And it just didn't feel right. I didn't really feel safe. Um, and I stepped out of it because I tried my best to grow. But, when things are, like you said, too rigid or there's just too constricted, people don't feel like they can actually be the way they want to and showing up. So
Yeah,
it's really important community
flexibility,
spaces.
adaptability, again, two core elements of trauma informed care that are so crucial to build trust in relationships.
Yeah. We also talk about, Katie, the future is trauma informed. How do you feel people can use the trauma informed approach in workspaces? What would that look like? Or at least start? This is like not an approach that's new, but not many people are so aware of that approach.
Yeah. So if you're not familiar with what trauma informed care is, or if even the term trauma gives you a little bit of a cringe, trauma is
Hmm.
not a bad word. It's a universal human experience. And our trauma is essentially a response because our bodies are brilliant and it's keeping us safe. So when we experience certain events and environments, that are beyond our capacity to cope with, that disconnect us from a felt sense of safety, whether it's in a shock kind of acute way or chronically and accumulative over time, our body is doing what it needs to do to keep us safe. And that response is trauma. And it manifests in a variety of physical, emotional, cognitive, and social behaviors and responses. Trauma informed care is a long-standing approach that is strengths based and believes that I have a hold and understanding of this universal human experience, that virtually every single person on this planet has a lived experience of trauma or toxic stress. And I'm going to use that to inform how I show up and build relationships, build trust, communicate, and lead within my scope of practice, or AKA your professional boundaries. So it's a lens through which we expand our empathy to better understand and ensure that we're not causing further harm in the spaces we live in, but rather promote trust and safety. And again, it's applicable to literally every profession, because these skills we're talking about are relationship building, communication skills, critical
Mhm.
thinking, decision making, self-awareness, emotional intelligence. All of these leadership buzzwords we use are the foundations of trauma informed care, but it's looking at it through the lens of honoring the depth and complexities of our humanity. I see
Yeah.
some
And
things
for what,
happening over here in this chat.
yeah. Do you want me to I'll go ahead and read it if you
Yeah,
want,
go
and then
ahead.
we'll go into that. So Josh said, I'm not sure if this is the scope of the event, but I would be curious if you could talk a little bit about rebuilding repair when trust is broken. So for example, if I make the mistake of saying I've been in your shoes and then realize it, what does repair look like? And then we'll get to the second part of the question.
Yeah. So we're human first and foremost, and we're going to say and do things that may cause someone to feel hurt or harmed. I'm a big believer that we need to humanize harm. We're human, we're going to cause harm. The biggest thing, and what Josh mentioned here, is then what? What do we do? And I think we forget to talk about the importance of naming harm and then being able to repair it. And I know, and we don't have enough time, but harm's a big nuanced conversation. So, for the sake here,
Mhm,
Josh, great example. This is where we come into modeling and mirroring these skills out loud. I just said the wrong thing. Oh, how human of me. If you
mhm,
notice it in the moment, like you said here, oh, I said something that may have felt dismissive. If you can in the moment, or maybe a little bit after, maybe you didn't realize it, you come back, say, hey, I just wanted to say, I realized I said this thing earlier. I'm so used to saying, these things. It just kind of rolled off. I just want to say, I realized that may have been a little dismissive. I don't know how that landed for you, but if it made you feel unseen or unheard, I'm sorry. And I'm going to make sure I slow down and I watch what I say in the future. And we also have to practice acceptance that that person may not have noticed. That person may have felt hurt and they may accept that apology. And it may take that person a little more time to trust you again. And we have to practice acceptance and allow them and give them permission to take that time they need to rebuild trust with you. But there's that moment of just shifting language in the moment is so powerful, and
mhm.
and how we lead this work out loud.
Yeah, and Katie, by doing that too, and that was a really great example. You're showing authenticity and you're taking ownership of what you just did and accountability. And I think in that sense too, when you can stop and own and say, I did this, but this is how I'm going to adjust it accordingly, it builds trust. And, it may take that other person some time to reveal that trust with you, but at least you put that up front and center. You admitted to it as well. And then, Josh, the other part he said is, or a step of further breaking trust. If someone says to me, Josh, that really hurt, and for some reason I still don't respond with kindness, what does it look like to rebuild trust?
Hmm. Yeah, so it's going to depend on the context of the relationship, the person, and what's happening. But the biggest thing I always suggest, and I am going to admit right now that I struggle with this, and so I am in this work all the time, is when someone does say something like, "Oh, that really hurt," or "I really felt harmed by this," or whatever they may say, and it may not always be super kind or land very well. We have to notice again, and we have to remember to pause, because what might happen, depending on our lived experience with conflict and miscommunications or whatever, is that we may then have a response of reaction. And if we become reactive and then we start to engage with that person and we're reactive, they're going to become reactive. And then we're just
Mhm.
going to be reacting off of one another. For true repair to occur and for trust to be rebuilt, we need to be sure that we can take that pause and say, hey, thanks for sharing that with me. I really need to take some time to sit with that and make sure that I can respond to you in a way that we can find, some repair here. And then finding ways to regulate your nervous system, to get curious, to reflect, maybe get some peer support or mentorship to really look at, take accountability of what's yours and what's not yours, and then come back to that person where you're in a responsive place so that they can be responsive. And then you're open for communication to occur. You can ask
Mm.
them, what would repair look like for you? What would help you build trust in this relationship? I'm here, I'm willing, I'm open. So that both of
Mm.
you can honor your humanity in the process, and it doesn't create any type of power dynamic where further harm can occur.
Yeah, because we know nothing good ever comes out from a power dynamic. And Josh, you are very welcome. And Katie, that reminds me of like when you talk about practicing, the pause, it really just kind of makes us take that moment to be at center with ourselves and be in the present moment, but also to gather our thoughts. Like you said, sometimes when somebody says something to us that may hurt, we're just wanting to say something very quickly. But it's like we know that we can't take back those words. So if we can really practice that pause, it gives us that moment just to kind of acknowledge what was said and then to come back with a more appropriate response as opposed to a very reactive one that again we just can't take back.
Absolutely. Practicing the pause is one of our simple, but it can be really challenging practices. And that's why I insert the term practice here,
Hmm.
because when we're able to take a moment to breathe, become present, actively present, we're then able again to access self consent, to choose to rather than react, to be able to respond. And I don't know about you, but I have a history of not handling conflict well because of my lived experiences of trauma. So when conflict arises, or maybe here's a relatable example, when someone makes maybe kind of a instigating comment on my LinkedIn post or my social media post, when I read that, I notice my body
Hmm.
immediately tense. My jaw locks. I get a weird feeling in my stomach. My
Hmm.
breath shortens, and I get anxious. And I
Yeah.
immediately want to type and fix it or communicate or whatever. And I know, okay, I need to pause. I need to turn the app off. I need to go for a walk. I need to shake that feeling out of my body. I need to
Hmm.
maybe talk it out with somebody. And then when I'm in a better, more regulated, neutral place, come back and respond to that person. That pause is essential because if I were to just go into something from that reactive state, I'm not present. I may say things I don't mean. I may regret it, or I may not be
Hmm.
able to truly hear what that person has to say because I'm so focused on what I think they're saying. And so that's why pausing, it doesn't have to be a huge pause, but maybe it does. Maybe you need a few days. But communicating that, especially like to Josh's point, if you're in relationship, is so important. Taking a pause together in a meeting when things are tight, heightened,
Hmm.
a beautiful example of leading these kinds of skills out loud.
Yeah. And it's really important, with Katie, with that, example that you gave. For me, if I'm told a comment I don't want to hear, as far as like if it's something really personal and it hurts, I have learned to be more vocal, more transparent, and saying, I need some time. I need some space to gather my thoughts and a more, like you said, when you're regulated, because when we're like on a high, we're just not in the right headspace. We may say things that we're probably going to regret. So I think it's also being very transparent and saying, these are my boundaries. This is what I need at this moment. I will come back when I'm ready. And hopefully that other person will respect that and allow you the space to come back any more appropriate, right? Headspace? Or you're more regulated?
Yeah. And I need to, if I'm that other person, I need to respect that. I need to allow for you to take that time and honor your boundaries. It may be hard for me. I may not, if I'm not pausing and present, I may start to push and then I may lose that trust for good because I'm not listening, actively
Mhm.
listening to understand you and then give you that space and honor that boundary.
Yeah. And there was another part that I wanted to talk to you about, and I'm sure many others that listen to this could relate or may have questions, is when we talk about active listening. Thing that I've had to really work on for myself as a community manager in both my personal too and professional spaces is that when people want to have a very deep conversation, they don't necessarily want you to talk or to you offer advice or suggestions. They just want you to hear them out, just to listen. So what I have learned that if there is a very deep conversation that's about to happen, I will ask permission and I will say, "Do you just want me to listen, strictly listen, or would you also like me to add or share my advice or feedback?" Because that lets me know at the very beginning what it is that they want and are expecting of me. Because sometimes I just want people to listen to me if I'm having a really bad day or I'm not feeling well. Because when people just start offering their advice about what you should or shouldn't do, and you can't do this, you can't do that, you're just like, you know, I should have never brought this up in the first place. I should have never told you. I mean,
Exactly.
it happens.
It happens all the time, right? We're just having a bad day, or maybe something really good happened. And then we get the unsolicited advice, the platitudes, and you're like, I just wanted to be heard. So you have such a great example of this. Ask the question. And maybe you can do it ahead of time, but maybe someone shared something with you and you're like, okay, thanks so much for sharing that with me. Would it be helpful, or are you looking for feedback? Are you looking for some advice? Are you looking just to be witnessed, and giving that choice to that person so they can be like, huh, yeah, I would like some feedback on that. Or actually, no, I just really needed to be heard. And then again, what a beautiful next step forward to trust, because you had that transparency, you asked those questions, and you're not assuming that you're there to fix, judge, or solve.
Yeah. And the other thing too, I know we have a few minutes, so Yasmina, it's so great to have you here. And if you guys have any questions, please bring them on in. There is one other thing too, when we talk about active listening and, taking the pause, it's mirroring the body language too and putting away the distractions. And when I mean distractions, is putting your PC off to the side, turning off your notifications, putting your phone way too, but looking at somebody, with direct eye contact as well, because you're letting them know, like, hey, I see you, I hear you, I feel the conversation, I'm with you to be in this very present moment of how I can support you the best way I can. Because I can't tell you how many times I've been in conversations and people are off doing so many things, or I'm on a phone call and people are typing and I can hear, and I'm like, I obviously can hear that
Yeah.
happening, but it's like, are you? So I've asked, when I do ask people and I want to have a conversation that's deep, I will ask them, do you have some time to speak with me about a very important topic? Because, people are busy and we don't want to just have a minute. We may need that space. So I will say, do you have time to talk about an important conversation? And I think that will signal off like, hey, for me, as conversation is not going to be 2 minutes, it might be 15.
That single-handedly has changed all of my relationships. Single-handedly. Hey, I'm going through this thing. Can I process something with you? Do you have the capacity to talk right now? It gives my friend, my partner, my colleague the choice to say, yes, I can give you my full attention, go ahead. Or say, actually, I have a lot going on right now. Can we connect tomorrow? It gives them that choice instead of just dumping, because we all know we've been there. We're probably that person where we just like, another thing kind of gets handled and we're like, oh, we're holding so much, we don't have the capacity right now. And it creates a beautiful dynamic and deepens that relationship. Because yes, not only are we multitasking with phones or not paying attention, but how many of us are making eye contact, listening really well, but really you're
Mm-hmm.
thinking about the thing you're going to say. You want
Yep.
to say something really good. You're trying to think about, oh, I've been there. I know what I'm going to say to you. That's
Mm-hmm.
not listening to understand. That's not active listening. You're in your own head again. So how do we pause? And it can be so hard to actively listen, or what I say, listening with resonance. We're really being able to engage with that other person to truly understand them rather than to say something prolific or share our story. We're rather centering them in their own experience.
That's a really good response. I'm gonna have to listen to this live again, by the way, and take notes. Just saying. And Paula said, very good point. That there's a fine line between wanting to share and getting frustrated because the other person wants to fix things for you. Absolutely. I mean, we can't. We just have to allow people to show up the way they are. People don't. People just want you to listen, like what Katie was saying. You know, we need to practice these moments where we really pay attention, mirror their body language, and make the eye contact. So we are out of time. So if you all have any other questions or comments, feel free to respond to the Trust and Talk conversation post. Katie and I will also go ahead and drop the ways that you can contact us. Katie, do you want to share really quickly maybe the ways that people can contact you? And we'll
Yeah.
drop it as well.
Absolutely. I'd love to connect on LinkedIn, so feel free to message me or send me a connection. My website's katie-kurtz.com, where all the information about who I am and what I do there. I also have a podcast called a Trauma Informed Future podcast, where I have conversations like this that go into the nuance in the conversation. I also love being able to leave people with like tangible takeaways. So I'm going to drop a little infographic that kind of summarizes some of these key tools and tips we talked about today, so that you have them and maybe start a conversation with others or practice yourself.
Yeah, awesome. And the way you can contact me, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can also DM me on there as well. You can throw me an email, and also just started a passion project for Humans of Connection docu-series. So I am trying my very best. I'm a one-woman show. I'm trying to bring on as many guests as possible and making it global. So, and Katie, if you ever want to learn more things about trauma-informed approaches, practices, Katie is very well versed in that area. So any other questions, again, feel free to drop them in the post and we will come back at some point and respond back to them. But want to thank you all for being here. It was so nice just jumping in and just listening, to you, Katie. Thank you. You did amazing. Would have never thought this was your first live, just saying.
It's giving me podcast vibes. So I love a good conversation. So I'm thrilled to be here and thrilled to connect with new folks on LinkedIn.
Yeah. So thank you, everyone. We will see you soon.